Good evening, Benji. I think this time we are both on the same time zone, or almost. So I think that makes things easier. And yeah, I want to say welcome to Building Deep Tech. And maybe you can tell me a little bit about yourself so people get an understanding, and then we dive right into it.
Cool, sounds great. And thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to chat to you in this way. So my name's Benji Barash. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Roboto AI. We're normally based actually in Seattle. That's where I'm mostly working. We have a team in Zurich as well, but I'm speaking to you today from London, where I'm originally from. You can maybe hear it in my accent, but it's gotten my accent's depreciated over the years after being in the US for so long now. So hopefully you can still hear some European qualities in my accent.
I'm I think I met your co-founder in I think it was February on a meetup in Zurich. So and yeah, I'm very interested in what you guys are doing, and we will have a bit more time about this later on. So, but right now, as people who are following this podcast know, I'm always interested in the early years. What made yeah what is it that makes you a founder? So maybe you can share as much or as little as you want about this.
Yeah, absolutely. How far back do you want me to go? Shall I,
The
we want to
the
go embryonic or kind of,
I really like the early years. So high school or when you're a child, because some people are telling me that my father or mother or brother or
Hmm,
uncle or whoever in their surroundings was someone who played a role, right? So go as far as you think that matters for us.
sure. Yeah, no problem. I think for me, the story probably starts just before high school, I would
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
So I think I grew up actually in a uniquely bad time in the UK from a technological perspective. And it's a weird
Hmm.
thing to say, but in the 70s and in the 80s, the UK had a pretty interesting tech scene, right? The UK was really known for sort of microchips. In school, you would learn computer programming. But when I went to school in the UK, none of that stuff existed. For some reason, at some point in the UK, the government decided to get rid of computer programming in school. They just got rid of it. And all they taught was IT, like information technology. And that was just, can you learn how to use Word, Excel, and PowerPoint? That was the skill set that they wanted to equip British school children with, basically for their, entrance into the business market ultimately. And so I think I remember just getting interested in, computer gaming and making websites and those sorts of things. And I could never understand why we didn't learn any of that stuff in school. And we'd learn Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And that was it. And so I actually got interested in technology because I could sort of see it around me and I just didn't know how anything worked. And I was really curious how all of those things just worked. How did the internet work? Like we had, the old dial-up connections where you'd hear the modem going like da-da, da-da, and it can be like, what is that even doing? And I was kind of annoyed that I didn't learn any of that stuff in school because I felt like that's the whole point of school. Um, so it was a strange time in this like British education system in kind of the 90s really where they just didn't teach any of this stuff. And I started getting interested even in primary school, kind of before high school. Um, what the companies were doing that built all of this technology. So even as a young kid, I remember like going onto the Google website and being like, what do you need to like work at Google? Like, what does that even mean? And I would look up the job postings even as a kid and be like, okay, you have to be something called a software engineer. Like, I don't know what that means, but you have to be something called a software engineer. And even I would see like you need educational requirement is like a computer science degree. I didn't even know what that meant either. And so actually that is what kind of ultimately led me to, you know, investigating those things over my youth.
And maybe to give a bit more context here, that is which year? So what years are we talking about?
So this would have been maybe in what we would call in the UK like year five or year six in kind of the last years of primary school, and then high school here or secondary school we call it starts at year seven, and you're maybe 11 or 12 at the beginning of high school. So this was
Hmm.
probably about nine or 10 when this interest kind of started materializing in a non-trivial way.
Interesting to see like that, especially being so young and being so curious about like job postings and like reverse engineering. What do I need to do? Even this is very early on, right? So, but somehow you remember that, and somehow that's stuck with you. So, what happened afterwards, or what happened through high school then?
Yeah. I mean, through high school, I think I was just honestly, I was yeah, just pretty disappointed that we didn't learn any of that stuff in high school. So I never learned any programming. I knew as I said thing. I knew I maybe want to do this thing called software engineering and computer science, but these are not subjects that exist in a British high school at the time. So, you're maybe studying science, you're studying English, history, geography, but there was no computer science or software engineering. This just didn't exist. But we did have these IT lessons that, we would have available to us. And I remember saying to my IT teacher at school, like, will we at some point get to like programming? Like, when are we going to get to like write some software or some code that can do stuff on these machines? And he sometimes he was a really nice teacher. He turned to me and he was like, I kind of know what you're talking about, but this isn't part of this course essentially, and it's not going to be part of this course for the whole time you're at school actually.
Hmm.
So even he told me early on like, that wasn't going to be. But he did say something interesting to me at the time. I remember he said, "But if you are interested in that stuff, you need to be really good at maths and you need to be good at science. And so if you are passionate about these things, those are the subjects that you should, pay the most attention to in school because they're gonna help you get to that, that kind of domain later on in life." Um, and I found that kind of like I was like, okay, like fine, but I already knew maths. Like everyone has maths lessons all the time, even when you're a kid. I was like, I get it. It's like I liked maths. I didn't love maths, but it still didn't like scratch this itch for me of like, how do you get into software and programming and things? So at that point, actually, it's funny to say now when I think about how the internet's changed, but I actually joined a lot of online forums as a 12-year-old, maybe 13-year-old. And these were forums where other people around the world that were probably about my age, maybe plus a few years perhaps, would just talk about programming. And so I found, online web forums where people would talk about making HTML websites, using PHP to do like backend server programming, even a bit of JavaScript here and there. And it was weird. I almost had these pen pals on all these forums, and we knew each other pretty well. And it was like this international community of like 12, 13, 14-year-olds that were all interested in programming. And we all had completely different levels of exposure to it. So some of these people were growing up in America. And I remember them telling me on these forums, like, we learned programming in high school. And I'd be like, whoa, like what? Like what do you even learn? Like that's so exciting. And some people would be in Japan and stuff. And I'm still in touch with some of these people that I met as like a 12, 13-year-old on the internet. It's crazy.
Love that.
Yeah, some of them even I worked at Amazon. Some of them even popped up and got jobs at Amazon too in totally different countries. And they'd send me a message like, are you the same Benji that I spoke to as a 12-year-old on this website Tzag, back in the day?
I love those stories.
It's crazy stuff. But that was honestly really how I got into it. People just almost exposing me on these forums, like to different technologies that I'd never heard of, and we would make cool websites. We'd do projects together. We'd sometimes do like informal programming competitions on these forums, like who could come up with the best solution to this problem. Um, and it was kind of crazy to think that's what the internet looked like then. You could really join these forums actually. And I never felt like it was dangerous. There was nothing unsafe about it, but it was just, a bunch of kids talking about coding.
And so this is happening parallel to school education, right? So how did this translate it into your surroundings, right? Because even today I see this on my like with myself, I like with my friends and the people I'm talking to on a daily basis. There's not too many connection points when it comes to these topics, right? But I mean, well connected through the internet with those people who are very interested in the same stuff, right? But now we are talking 20 years ago. So how did that? Because nowadays everyone is walking around looking on the mobile phone, not talking to each other when they ride the metro or the bus, and even at the bus station, right? Everyone is just looking at the phone and having earphones, and so there's everyone is very isolated. But back then, 10, 20 years ago, it was not like that. So how was that with you interacting with other people outside of the internet, the monitor?
Yeah, I think some of my friends just probably thought I was into some weird stuff, just talking about coding and programming. Some of my friends didn't care at all, right? They just want to go play football, in the park, and that was it. But I think when I got to high school, I went to a fairly large high school, so I was able to find other people there that you just naturally become friends with, and you're like, you start talking about things, and you can tell they are kind of maybe interested in some of the same stuff. Like I had a few friends in high school that were pretty interested in animation, like using computer technology early on. Like you think about the old kind of Macromedia Flash that became obviously Adobe and Flash and all the Creative Suite and things like that these days. But some of my friends were really into that. And what was interesting about this animation side of all that technology was there was often a coding component. And so we actually, even with some friends of mine earlier in high school, we'd kind of code up these cool animations that we then even put on the internet and show other people. But I think actually I was able to find a few friends in high school that also were naturally interested in some of these things. And we kind of formed a bit of a like collective that spanned, we were in kind of different friendship groups, but we kind of also became friends ourselves across the cliques, and had a bit of a kind of interest group even as kind of kids in high school. And actually we would spend some lunch times instead of going out and playing football with all of our friends, we'd go to the kind of school library where there were the computers and we'd sort of, hack on stuff together and work on a few projects together. Sometimes they were a bit nefarious because we were trying to get into some of the school systems that we shouldn't be able to get into. And sometimes it was more just creative, exploration of like animation technology or building websites together or, trying to understand how the world worked.
Um, I think there's a lot of in television, series, movies. There's a lot of cliches about, and here I don't want to, let's say, I don't want to be too politically correct, but not offending anybody. But um, if I'm gonna use the word nerd in a most positively way I can, uh, it's nice to see it's not everyone is suffering. Not everyone feels like an outsider, right? There's some sort of bonding, and then there's some sort of maybe the word brotherhood is not correct, but English is not my mother tongue. So, but some sort of the feeling to belong to some place, to belong, right? And I think it's nice to hear how positively and how energetic you speak about those times and the connection with those people. I think this is very. Uh, it's a nice way of seeing it. It's a nice way of experience it, and see that this is not necessarily something where you're missing out because you were just mentioning friends of they would like to play soccer or whatever, and which is like totally normal. Yeah, you don't need to play soccer, right? There is another world that you can be part of that is just as or can just be as great and fun and interesting as those worlds, right? Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know, I just wanted to share my feelings about about this.
And sometimes it's not binary as well, right? I think what I discovered is that it can be
True.
kind of a hybrid. I would play football sometimes and I'd keep friends of mine that wanted to do that all the time, but sometimes I also just was missing and they didn't know where I was and I was just in the school library with my nerdy friends, hacking on some stuff.
Absolutely right. There's not everything is black and white. Yeah. Uh, so I talk to a lot of people that are about to become students or they are students and they do their bachelor's, do their master's, and always before the next step, there is a lot of struggle. What should I do? Where should I go? Like we all experience, the majority of us experience that, right? I had a few people in the podcast that said, no, I knew I wanted to be roboticist since I was 8. I saw Iron Man, and for me, that was the path, right? So there was no struggle for me because I knew exactly what are the stages. How was that for you?
I think I'm in that second category as well. I think if you asked my parents, they would say Benji always wanted to be in technology and he knew he was very excited about, understanding how technology worked and especially things that moved and did stuff in the real world. And I think that's kind of why I got into robotics and drones. But yeah, I think I was quite lucky, even to the point where I said to you before, right, where I was looking at job postings as a 9, 10 year old, right? Like it was ridiculous. And I always thought to myself, like, that was kind of the North Star. I don't remember why that's the North Star I set for myself, but I think from a young age, I kind of got it in my head, like that's where I want to go. I also, to be honest, I think at some point, maybe as a kid, I'd seen maybe even an article about like what the Google offices look like, and it just looked like this crazy place where these super smart people are like kind of partying, but also creating all this technology that's changing the world. So it also looked like that's where, some really smart, creative people spend their time on the planet. So why wouldn't I want to be in that cool like group of people? So maybe that also was some conditioning and bias that I'd been exposed to early on and then thought that would be cool. Um, so yeah, it was always fairly linear to me. Even when I finished high school, as I was saying, they didn't offer any computer science and programming courses, but I managed to convince the school to even let me take to do an A level, like the last qualification that we do in the UK. They let me teach myself an A level in computer science, basically, and then still sit the exam in the school. And it was just me and I think one other person in the school did it together. And we, just taught the course ourselves. It was kind of crazy in hindsight, but I got an A in it, so I was pretty happy. And then um, even before that, I was then, and I'd applied to do computer science at university in the UK. And one thing that's weird actually in the UK, I talk about this with my American friends now a lot. The UK kind of forces you to decide what you're gonna major in university very early on. So like 2 years before you finish high school, you've already committed to the course that you're going to do in university, and you have to do all the right prerequisites for that as well. So it kind of forces you, to your point, it kind of forces you to think, what am I going to be doing in, you know, 2 years' time for maybe 3 or 4 years after that, which is kind of crazy. Some friends of mine ended up going to university and they end up doing a course that they had to commit to years before and they hate it and they can't change so easily. I had friends that were doing history degrees and they wanted to change to English, and sometimes in the UK you just have to leave university and reapply, which sucks. So I'd had computer science in my headlights for a while, I guess, and it was pretty linear.
And I mean, this makes less sense if you think about what kind of mental state you are, right? I mean, not only you have no idea who you are and what you want to do, it's like all those. I mean, you're transitioning from a teenager to an adult, and that takes. I mean, we are males, so that might take a
What
little
time?
while. So, and then making decisions that are so important and they have so big consequences, right? So early on. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I'm excited about. I have a few teachers in my friend group, and not everyone agrees. But as people in tech, we believe for the better of tech, right? That's why we're doing this. And so having AI being able to teach us, right? And we can ask the same stupid question 20 times until you get it, right? And so there's no shame, there's no other people that are faster than you or slower than you. Everyone has his own pace, and it's totally fine because you have your own tutor, right? And you can explore things that, whatever that might be, in different kind of formats, right? You can read and pictures and videos. So I'm excited for this kind of time that we might have the opportunity that everyone gets served the way they needed to, right? Coming back to your way and university, so you apply for computer science and then you study computer science.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's funny, like when I first started the computer science course as well, because I'd never been formally exposed to it as, in high school or secondary school. I didn't even really know what to expect when I got to university. It's kind of a funny thing. I actually had quite a lot of programming experience by that point, but I would go to a lot of the open days for the computer science programs, and some of the professors would stand there and say, we actually prefer people that don't have any programming experience when they start a computer science degree because they get worried that people have learned bad habits if they
Mm.
try to teach themselves. And so I remember even early on in the computer science degree, I was thinking like, oh no, like, is it bad that I already have done quite a lot of programming? Because I'm worried now I'm not good at it. Maybe I've got some really bad, habits I picked up along the way. And to your point, I think what's so amazing these days about kind of AI and having a personal tutor and things like that is, you can have that confidence almost certainly that you maybe have learned things the right way because you can ask the right kinds of questions and say, you could say to the AI, are you teaching this to me kind of in alignment with kind of best practices? Or is the code I've just written actually good, or is it bad? Like, have I done something stupid here? Whereas when I was teaching myself in, I don't know, the early mid 2000s, who knows? I was just using friends online, these kind of different kids online with me we'd look at each other's code that we'd written and be like, you could have done something a bit better here, or I would have used this method. But we know what, we didn't really know what good looked like. You know what I mean? It was more kind of democratic in a way. Um, so yeah, I got to university, did computer science. At that time, I was always pretty interested in kind of hardware as well. I sometimes regretted like maybe I should have done computer science with electrical engineering or some kind of hardware component because I think it's always I think I always got most excited about kind of devices, like things that just do stuff, and it kind of took me back to my childhood fascination about, how does everything work? Like you're looking at hardware or TVs, computers, phones, like how does this all work? I can't see all these signals and waves in the air, but somehow it's all communicating. So I always had sort of an affinity for that side of computer science as well. And I think that's what, yeah, ultimately made me excited about, robotics and machine learning and some of these kind of, they weren't necessarily, I wouldn't call them emerging technologies while I was at university, but they were certainly going through a resurgence in excitement, right? Like robotics as a field has been around a long time. Machine learning as a field has been around for a long time. I think when I was at university, though, they were both going through a revitalization of relevance, so to speak. Because this was still before deep learning. I was in university before deep learning got exciting. Um, and then just as I was finishing university, deep learning kind of like snapped back into, you know, the public mindset.
And was that something that, as you said, I mean, this happened not necessarily intentionally, but as a byproduct by how hardware also developed, right? There's more compute. There's more compute. There's more the connection between labs and research all over the world because now the internet is fully grown, is an adult, right? There's really connection happening between universities, and so this is where the jump now comes, right? So it was boiling for quite a while, and then how they say, right? There's years nothing happened, and then something happens. There's years happening in some moments, right? Uh, but did you get enough of it when you finished university and then entered the job market? Maybe you can share a bit about this time.
Yeah, it was a really, yeah, it was a kind of a weird time, I think, because it was just before this deep learning explosion. I think, when I was in my fourth year of university, I was taking some machine learning course, and we didn't even cover deep learning, if I remember. It was we were learning support vector machines, like k-means clustering, like just various traditional statistical methods, right? I think maybe at some point one of our professors might have alluded to like neural networks, but we didn't spend time unpacking that as a big topic. Um, and then I think at some point you know, AlexNet, like Krzyzewski paper came out, and that's kind of what blew everything up, really. And to your point, it's exactly what you're saying. The volume of data was so much larger than ever before because of data sets like ImageNet. That was at least the first one I remember as having been kind of a really big data set that came along from, I think, Fei Lee's lab in Stanford. Um, and that combined with the GPU technology that was kind of getting better and better and better kind of led to this, you know, exciting convergence point where suddenly like neural networks were like able to achieve performance that the traditional methods had been working around for years, but now had been fully supplanted by. So it was yeah, it was kind of a crazy time. And at that point, I did what took me into then the job market was internships at Amazon. So I just applied randomly at some point in my third year of university for an internship at Amazon. Really, just one of those like you go on the website, oh, they have some internships at Amazon. Cool, I'll send my resume. I didn't expect to even hear anything back because you send off loads of these things. And then they invited me for an interview, and I did the you know did an internship for Amazon in London, then did another internship for them the following summer in Seattle. And even at this point, still machine learning and AI wasn't that exciting. It wasn't, no one was talking about it. It was all just happening kind of quietly in some of these research labs, like you were saying. Um, but yeah, it's kind of crazy to think back to now because it's not that long ago, but it still feels like a long time ago.
Especially when we're talking about like what to expect. You said this earlier, for example, with the university and computer science courses, but also being in university and now entering the job market. There's, I talk this a lot with people in the industry that doing same kind of jobs that I do. Is the theory part, because especially in our industry, there's very deep expertise that very often is necessary, right? So there's a podcast with founders, and a lot of these founders have PhDs, right? Spending a decade or longer in university, and then deciding, you know what, this technology I'm working at is very unique, or is very something now is possible that wasn't before, right? And then making the switch and to become an entrepreneur. We come to this part later on, but what I wanted to ask is, coming out of university, do an internship. This is the first taste of working, and then going to the US, different culture, and now working for one of the biggest companies now in the world, right? I don't know exactly when you entered, but it was still pretty big then, I guess, corporate.
It was,
So how is that for you, from teaching yourself some basic programming on some forums to now being in the heart of those companies that rule the world right now?
yeah, honestly, it was pretty surreal. I think, the computer science degree in the middle there gave me a more normalized sense of what the industry looked like a bit. Because, of course, by the time I got to university, I was no longer surrounded by my friends from high school, right? I was surrounded by other people that knew about computer science and were really smart, very into it. We were actually on a very competitive course. So a lot of my friends on that course were, we would compete with each other. We really wanted to get the best results and all these best courseworks and things like that. It's probably the first time in my life I really worked super hard, I think, actually, as well. And I was motivated by, this sense of competitiveness, which is funny in hindsight. Um, but yeah, I think at that point it'd given me a bit of a window into the tech industry from the computer science degree perspective. But ultimately, yeah, it was very surreal. I think you touched as well on like sort of PhDs versus industry before as well. It's so funny for me now. It's bizarre. Like I never really even considered doing a PhD. It was never like a strong consideration for me because I think having done the internship at Amazon quite early in the degree program, I think I could just see the momentum of Amazon as a company, especially this was like AWS obviously existed. It was like people generally knew about AWS in the tech industry, but it wasn't like a phenomenon yet where, AWS wasn't a household name really at that point. And I could just see the velocity that the company was moving at. And I just felt like clearly industry was where kind of all this progress was being made very quickly. And this is maybe mean to say, but I would look at kind of the people that had stayed at my university and continued on doing PhDs, and I felt like it was a much slower progression. And it kind of necessitates that because you need that space, that time to dig into a very specific topic and become an expert in it. But I just felt like the industry was moving faster than
Hmm.
academia in a way. And I still think actually that might be true. I think it's actually not stopped in that sense. And maybe to the point now we can talk about it, but I think actually a lot of the biggest tech companies now have the most state-of-the-art research in a way that they have such big budgets, such big teams and resources that it's pretty difficult for university labs to compete at this point. Um, so yeah, that had given me a window into the tech industry, but it was pretty weird. It was pretty full circle. I remember some of my first days at Amazon thinking like, wow, like I'm actually in one of these big tech companies now. I'm inside it, and you become aware of it pretty quickly because whatever you might be working on, I actually started in Amazon pretty randomly on one of the Amazon video teams, like doing all the video streaming and predictive caching for content that people might want to download and watch. And it was a big deal. Like I remember even in one of my internships, I remember like a VP was running down the corridor. Everyone had gone home. I was just sort of working late because I was excited about my intern project. And he came running down the corridor and he was like, I need one of the engineers right now. Like we've got an issue with like, devices are filling up the cache and they're running out of memory and someone needs to make an operational config change right now to fix all this issue. I was like, oh, isn't there someone that's on call responsible for that? And he said, no, they're not answering. So can you do it in turn? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I kind of know vaguely probably the right things to look at and fiddle with. And he was like, yeah, okay, you've just got to do it right now. So I
Vaguely.
ended up doing
So
it. And when you do those things, it was like this was affecting millions of devices, and you realize at the big tech company scale, like, yeah, you have an impact on potentially a huge product line very, very quickly. Um, he then got in trouble later on for having told an intern to do that, but fortunately, I
mm,
didn't mess it up. So it was okay.
um, especially with these kind of companies, you just said it. There's resources, there is the talent, right? And not only resources labor-wise, but especially hardware-wise, right? So you can do things that universities can just not afford. And uh, do you think that this is? I mean, I don't want to get here now too philosophically, but the good thing about this kind of research in university is not everything is use case driven and benefit driven or revenue driven. So there might be some things that in the first few steps doesn't look like it's worth doing it, right? But long term or through that way, you discover things that then have other value that you weren't expecting before. And I think this is one of the problems that we have in the industry when it comes to deployment and adoption. So I work a lot with startups, right? So and with manufacturing companies, automotive and other ones, and adoption is very hard because everyone is very ROI driven, and so this needs to be making click very fast, right? I need to see the value of it. I need to make a so this needs to be business case. So if there's no business case behind that, we're not talking about use case, we're talking about business case, right? And so do you think now, as you said, that friends at university maybe are not being on par on the edge things that we are working on? Do you think there's so what's your take on that? If you would like, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I think the point you made is really salient. Actually, I completely agree with you. Neural networks might not have ever existed if like a university didn't fund that research in a way, right? And have a very long-term perspective on maybe this isn't useful for another 2 decades. Who knows when this will be useful? But I think you're right. Some of the best research is probably done because there isn't some strange business ROI that is artificially creating the need for it. It's almost just academia is just pushing out the boundaries of what's possible on many different fields all the time, right? But I do think, yeah, in the computer science space, it's a bit of a strange it's a strange domain in this way though, because the nature of a lot of computer science now is that it is so resource and you know compute intensive, right? So I think it's become one of these maybe it's become one of these disciplines. I talk about it with friends sometimes. There are sports where it's expensive to play some sports and you need a lot of equipment, right? Like skiing, you have to have a nice pair of skis. The mountain's expensive, got to stay somewhere expensive. Whereas playing football or soccer, you just need a ball. It's really, really easy. And I tend to like sports where you don't need a lot of upfront investment in equipment and things and memberships and all these kinds of stuff. And computer science has probably moved a bit more from being that kind of theoretical, you can kind of do it with a pen and paper, and it's moving more towards like actually you need a lot of gear, you need a lot of equipment to kind of do state-of-the-art stuff now, right? Especially with AI. Um, and I think that is ultimately just driven by, the budgets available. What I have seen has been working though is this is maybe more common in the US. I've seen, I'm not sure how common it is in the UK, but in the US, a lot of the top research labs and universities are really now kind of almost partnered with different big tech companies, right? So a lot of the top postdocs and top PhD students are simultaneously working at Amazon or Google or OpenAI, and a lot of their research is maybe even sponsored by those companies, even to the point where the professors are spending quite large portions of their time as in-house employees as well at these tech companies. And it kind of works for both people because obviously academia historically hasn't paid that well compared to big tech companies. So it's good for professors and postdocs to be able to make big tech company money. But at the same time, get access to resources that then enable them to do state-of-the-art research with their postdocs and PhDs that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to have access to. But it is tricky. Like there are even professors in Seattle, University of Washington, same for Stanford, where good professors are now maybe only at the university like 10, 20% of the time because they spend 80% of the time now working at Google or Nvidia or something like
Yeah.
that. So, you know, there is some tension there around time
I
allocation.
I guess. Um, I really would like to understand how then you guys, because you said that you were working on Amazon, and I do know a little bit more about the history of your company, but maybe you can take us and do the jump, or or going over that bridge from being an employee at Amazon and being excited. I mean, we were just starting in the internship, right? But there's a few years, but maybe we can maybe go that bridge from Amazon to what you guys doing today.
Yeah, no problem. So I think the relevant bridge there is most of my full-time employment at Amazon. I was there for about 7 years or so. Most of that time was spent in the robotics side of Amazon, working on Prime Air, Amazon's drone delivery project. So I spent most of my years working on drones at Amazon, and I worked on simulation and autonomy algorithms and different types of sensors. So really kind of super bleeding edge robotics development. And really, the motivation for the company actually was that these kinds of robots, especially that we were building at Amazon, were generating so much data that we just couldn't analyze it all. There was like too much of it, and we would have issues. Like our drones would crash, our robots would have edge cases and failures, and we would sometimes investigate those things and be upset that we could have maybe found the problem a few months before if we had been able to like wrangle all of this data more efficiently. And so that's kind of what motivated us to start the company. I think me and Eve, my co-founder, we were always excited about working in the big tech space. Like we liked working at Amazon. We could have stayed there even longer, but we had that itch, you know, that entrepreneurial urge to maybe go out and build something sort of outside the walls of a company that you're working in. And I think we saw kind of a generational opportunity as well, where Amazon was really ahead of the curve on a lot of the robotics, you know, engineering and robotic deployment. So we felt like we'd had almost a sneak preview of this data problem at Amazon that,
Nice.
in theory, the rest of the industry was going to have a problem with as well. And we actually discovered at Amazon that it was a choke point. Like this kind of volume of data and analyzing it efficiently was a really important point from going from a few robots to lots of robots. You have to kind of solve this inflection point of the data problem. And we were looking out at other companies and we were like, you know, not really many companies have solved this. It's maybe just Waymo and Tesla and Amazon. There aren't really a huge number of these kind of big players in that space. It's kind of still the case, to be honest. Um, so we thought like maybe there was an opportunity to do that from a, you know, entrepreneurial perspective.
The question that always needs to come first. I mean, a lot of people, especially when you're being with the like in academia and researching and doing some stuff, you're excited about the technology, right? But you were already an employee and were looking for a solution. So you had a problem. So you were looking for something that could make your life easier, right? And this is always, or this should always be one of the starting points in do I do something on my own? Is there is there a need that needs to be filled versus I have an idea and let's see who could need it, right? And being your own like I need something. I need some. I'm the customer. I need something. There's nothing out there that serves my needs, right? And I have a few colleagues here that work on the same stuff, and they don't have a solution either. And there's no other companies that do this kind of what we do, but we do, can, as you said, the preview, the glimpse into the future, because no one has a fleet, right? There's a lot of saying that the biggest robotic company actually is Amazon,
Yep.
and but this is one part, being able to reflect that and to be able to detect that. But then there's this, you live have this comfortable life. You live big corporate. You get paid pretty well, I guess, and then making the step. You know what? I don't like 9 to 5. I like 24/7. So let's do something. Let's do something and make our life harder. So how is that? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think, you know, even when I think back to when I finished university, I was almost going to start a company when I finished university with a friend. And actually
Okay.
we, you know, finishing university, I had a job to go to Amazon. This friend of mine, he had a job offer to go to Apple. And we both looked at each other and we were like, you know, we could start a company now, but at the end of the day, we don't know how the world works. You know, we're like new grads, and we've both got really cool job opportunities. So why don't we go do those jobs for a few years, and we'll see if we, feel the need to start a company after that. And then I think, having then spent 7 years at Amazon, it was way longer than I expected that I would be working in a big tech company as opposed to starting a company. But what was obvious to me, though, by the time I did leave Amazon was that I had kind of a good bedrock of corporate experience at that point. So, to be honest with you, it actually made the leap into then the kind of risky prospect of starting a company not feel as risky because I felt like, you know what, I have achieved some level of like corporate understanding and I've moved up the hierarchy a little bit. And I feel like, worst case scenario, if the startup didn't work out, I could probably go and get a job again at a big tech company, given the experiences I already had. So I think that actually helped offset some of that risk, but I was also not yet burned out on the technology industry that I wasn't then prepared to work really, really hard.
Mm.
I was still very excited about the kind of possibilities in the space. And I think actually I sometimes tell people like if I'd maybe left it a few more years, like if I'd been at Amazon for like 10, 12, 13 years and then made the move to start a company, it might have been really difficult for me to get into that startup, mindset where you do work kind of 24/7 and my own life might have been quite different, right? I don't have kids yet, but maybe I'd have had kids by that point if I'd
Yeah.
decided. I mean, I think the equation there becomes completely different, right, in terms of your available time and willingness to travel and all these kind of things.
So the two of you are looking at each other and says, there's nothing out there, let's do something about that. And then like quitting and incorporating something and then working on the technology, but also needing some space, needing some resources, but also needing contact to the people, even though, I mean, for the very early on stage, you can ask yourself the questions because you are a customer, right? But then you do actually need some customers. Maybe you can walk us through that very early phase and where you guys are at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing we decided quite early on to help the transition from having gone from big tech to a startup was we decided to join a startup incubator,
Hmm.
which was in our case the Allen Institute for AI in Seattle, AI2.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting organization, AI2. It's really a research organization. But the most interesting, actually, it's some of the most interesting LLM and computer vision research has come out of the Allen Institute, but most people don't realize that. Like it actually, a lot of the biggest, earliest large language models came out of the Allen Institute, and then it eventually became things like BERT and ultimately ChatGPT and GPT and whatnot. So the Allen Institute has a really interesting research pedigree. And they also have a startup incubator. So we decided to join the startup incubator. And that was really helpful as first-time founders. Me and Eve were pretty humble, I would say, that we knew a lot about how big tech worked, but we knew we didn't know a lot about how startups worked. We didn't know how to raise money. We didn't understand, all the steps of customer discovery and product market fit and all these kind of things because we're technologists. Like we just never done that stuff before, right? So we joined the incubator very intentionally to get that level of enrichment, and they put us through a pretty great, rigorous program in a way. Like the first thing they said, when we got to the incubator was like, don't start building straight away. Like, we know you guys have a great idea. We know you understand the problem space, but don't just start coding right now. Like you guys are already you're trained to just start coding, but instead do what you just suggested and let's go and do some real customer discovery. Like, don't just talk to people that you already know. Phone up some random people, do some cold outreach, find out if anyone actually cares about this problem that isn't just going to be friendly and nice to you. So they put us through those paces, and it was actually a really fascinating exercise to, just reach out to people cold and be like, hey, we're two entrepreneurs working in this space. We had this pain point at Amazon. Like, do you have this pain point? Will you get on the phone and talk to us about it? And we got a bunch of people on the phone, and they were happy to talk us through all of their pain points as well. And I think that gave us a much broader view of the problem space and the market than we were anticipating early on. And you just realized all the nuances as well. Like we were coming out of this drone space, we talked to people that were working on autonomous cars, we talked to people working on surgical robots, autonomous like agricultural robots. And there's so much that all these things have in common, but there's also a lot of things they have that are quite different, right? And so that helped us refine where in this stack we wanted to be because we understood we needed to build something that was going to be horizontally useful in this robotics industry, but at the same time, we couldn't solve everything, so it kind of doing that early customer discovery and validation kind of helped us find the right, entry point, I would say.
And what do you guys do? So walk me through. What do you guys offer? What kind of pain? I mean, you mentioned this earlier on, but maybe you can tell me what are you guys doing?
Yeah, sure. So the fundamental problem we solve is that robotics companies just generate lots and lots and lots of log data. And that might be log data that their real robots are producing, but it might also be synthetic or simulated data that they've generated as well, kind of offline. Um, and the problem with all of this data is that it's very, very large. Like even with one robot, you can end up generating terabytes of data in a few hours if you just recorded everything all the time. Um, and so when something goes wrong on any of those robots, you have to maybe download terabytes of data just to kind of start looking through it and trying to figure out like what maybe went wrong. And what's crazy is like this problem just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Like the more robots you have, the more data is being generated. And now think like if you're Amazon, you've got a million robots. They just announced recently they've got a million robots deployed now. Think about how much data is being produced by all of these robots. They have so many sensors on them, lidars, cameras, radars, etc. And all that data is going somewhere and needs to be analyzed. So we really help companies look at the right data efficiently so that they can find problems, they can find edge cases, and ultimately make their robots work performantly and actually give the benefit that they're meant to give to their end customers. So we're really trying to crack this robotics data problem. And I would think about us as an analytics layer on top of all of this robotics data to help companies curate and analyze all of it. Kind of some of the analogies we use, especially with investors sometimes, are kind of, what maybe a data dog did for sort of server infrastructure and analyzing all the data that's coming off of servers. We're trying to do that really from a robotics perspective.
As AI and robotics is the hottest topic at the moment, right? There's a lot of hype also involved. I mean, everyone who's in the industries is very skeptical about how big is the hype, what will happen with the bubble. But there's also undeniably a need on different kind of perspective, right? Especially if we're looking at, and this is a story that all the robotic startups are, uh, let's say not selling, but telling, is the demographic topics, right? So there is a huge lack of labor force on one part, but also the so this hype, and everyone is going into robotics. You still see, because what you said earlier on, that there's not too much out there. Is that still the case, or do you see, people are focusing on making the robot walk, making the robot talk, making the robot move, right? This is what people are focusing on, and so there's still actually the big need because there is no wave of robotic analytic data startups coming up. How is that like? How is competition for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now more than ever, we're really in a amazing wave of like robotic startups. And I think it's even taken me and Eve by surprise, like how quickly the space is becoming energized. My current working theory actually is if you look at how AI has been evolving, right? We were very excited about LLMs, a couple of years ago, and we're still very excited about LLMs. But a lot of this AI energy has like spilled into the physical world now, right? And I think people are realizing, yeah, AI is going to be a huge enabler from a physical hardware robotics perspective. And at the same time, we've just had these amazing tailwinds in like GPU technology. Even when we were talking about it from the like 10 years ago, 12 years ago perspective with the deep learning, it's so much better now. And one of the big key innovations is that it works better from an embedded perspective now as well. Like the embedded NVIDIA GPUs are really, really good now. 10, 12 years ago, they were kind of bad actually. Um, and so that combined even with like the proclivity of like sensor availability is so much better now. Like 10, 12 years ago at Amazon, we'd use all these machine vision cameras. They had USB 3 connections, which caused interference. They were very unreliable. They'd shake out of the connections and the cameras
Mm.
would disconnect. So anyway, there's so much of this enabling technology that is just pushing robotics like into the future every day. It's super exciting. I think what we've seen because of all these technologies now, it's getting pretty easy for startups to build a robot now. Like it used to be kind of difficult to build a robot to try and do a specific task someone had in mind. But now it's pretty easy because some of this stuff is pretty off the shelf. But where the problem still is this like scale up. Like, okay, you've shown me in a sort of lab environment that you've got a robot that kind of does the thing you say your company does. But now how are you going to turn this into a scaled up business where you can actually have this robot do the thing you want it to do reliably, safely, at scale? And I think that's still really difficult. I think what people are starting to realize is that the data is the thing that gets you there, though. And when you look at the successful robotics companies like Amazon, Waymo, Tesla, the secret really behind the scenes is that they have an amazing like data flywheel. That's really the key innovation at this point that's letting them scale, scale, scale. They collect more data all the time, every day, but they can very efficiently work out, was this data new and interesting? Did something anomalous happen? Or is it like all the old data we've seen before a million times and we can just get rid of it? So this data problem is becoming, I think, sort of top of mind for people. What's also been happening in the robotics industry, though, is that this kind of foundation model space for robotics is really picking up as well. And that's a totally different approach to traditional robotics, which has been more state machine oriented and whatnot. And in order to do these foundation models for robotics, you also need tons of diverse, high quality data. But then you have a curation problem around it as well. Like, what stuff should I use to fine tune or train my big foundation model now? Anyway, so there's just tons of this data problem in robotics. There's simultaneously too much data. That's kind of what we're trying to help solve. And there's also not enough data, or good diverse data that these
Yeah,
foundations are trying to
not
solve.
enough of the right data, right, necessary to
The right
train
data.
the different kind of task. Mm.
Exactly. So it's kind of this dual weird problem. And there are different companies, I think, in our space now that are trying to solve different parts of this whole equation. And I think it's funny, we're all quite friendly, all these different like robotic data oriented companies, even though we do totally different things, because I think we can see that we're all going to form part of a mosaic of tooling that will enable the industry to really take off. So some companies are very focused on visualization, like Foxglove. We're very friendly with the team there. Some companies are more focused on
I
fleet
had
management.
Adrian on the podcast like a while
Oh, nice.
ago.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, great team. They've been doing awesome stuff. They worked on those projects even at Cruise early on at kind of the autonomous vehicle
I
size.
remember. Yeah.
Visualization's a big problem, and then fleet management as well is like a whole different can of worms. Like, how do you look at all of your robots where they all are right now? Maybe you need to teleoperate some of them. In our case, we're coming at it though from the perspective of, you probably don't want to just look and visualize at every log. That's not going to scale, right? You have to have more automatic analysis that's going to be happening behind the scenes, especially as this volume of logs is increasing. So, um, there's just going to be kind of different parts of that equation that help companies at different stages kind of, get to production and stay there.
Exciting, and I think this is definitely something that looking back at some of the founders, I really like to show more that there's more than just humanoids, right? I had Nicholas from Rerun on the pod a couple of weeks ago. So this is my second, third time that I'm digging into this space, right? And it's nice to see that you guys are also very excited, and then there's so many problems that you see that you would like to attack. And as you said, I think you articulated it pretty well, that there's will be kind of a mosaic where there will be a lot of solutions to a lot of different parts of bigger problems, right? And not everyone is be able to. There's one solution that solves all those problems, especially if there's a lot of things that we still don't understand, I guess. But yeah,
It's a really exciting time. I think, especially when Adrian and I see each other, we always just remark like even both of our companies are like scratching the surface on this problem space right now. And we get very excited actually about innovations in this tooling space. The closest analogy we all have is kind of the modern data stack and how that evolved kind of 1 decade ago. And, there were companies originally that were kind of doing everything, but then it quite quickly fractured, and these days you have data lakehouse companies, you have data transformation companies, you have data analytics companies. And in reality, this whole stack needs to be rewritten in the era of robotics and the era of sensor data. And it's too huge a problem space for any one company to solve. So I actually think I'm excited about ways that we also can collaborate ourselves so that we perhaps as the companies that have the most visibility into all of these other actual hardware robotics companies, how can we do a really good job of maybe starting to create this mosaic, right? So that it's then very straightforward for a potential, you know, robotics company to understand how all these tools could be used and fit together nicely. So we're trying to understand what are the right and what are the right APIs and SDKs we can design around one another so that we can give our respective customers the best possible experience to bring everything together as well. Um, but that's difficult. The needs of a startup are always challenging to balance, right? Like we have a duty to our community and to the customers that we work with, and then we also, of course, want to grow the business and be, as successful as possible. So we try to balance that as well.
Interesting that you use that kind of analogy that fits perfectly with startups itself, right? Because in the very early stages of a startup where you're 10 people, there's a lot of people that do a lot of stuff. But as you grow quickly and bigger, then it's impossible, right? So what you were just saying with there were a few players that were handling a lot of stuff, but as the topic grew and the specialization grew, you do need to hire people that just do one thing, right? So you do need tools that actually do just one thing. And so now we're getting into the corporate phase of where you do need to have those things in place because it's too big, right? And I mean, I worked for Siemens, and they have been around the block for 180 years, right? So, and the question why innovation is so hard for those companies is, yeah, because we've been around so long and we've been building such a deep expertise that we split it up to the atom, and we would like to ensure that this atom is very well handled. So we ensure that there's one person that handles just that one atom. So then you have so many people that are working on so different stuff, so isolated, it's very hard to make them move again. So, uh, and here there's the advantage of having smaller teams and having, yeah, not so a diverse portfolio of things that you need to handle. Anyways, yeah, I mean, what's your plan? I'm always asking that towards the end of my podcast. What are you guys aiming at? Is there a specific launch happening? Is there a product release? Is there a customer collabo? Anything you would like to give our listener? Thank you for listening. Giving a little preview or sneak peek.
Yeah, I think true to our name's always been Roboto AI. But the internal joke in our company actually has been that, we didn't work on some of the AI aspects for a long time. I think we realized early on in the company that we wanted to build a good kind of foundation. And now we can really use AI to exercise that foundation. And I think the most exciting things that we're working on really are, how can we make it even easier for kind of humans to find problems with all of these like large, robot deployments that they might have. And I think, as this stuff starts touching, agentic exploration and, you know, anomaly detection, we're starting to see some really exciting stuff internally that we're excited to kind of start sharing with customers that we're working with. Um, it's really amazing, like if you just get the kind of fundamentals right, how then AI can go and use those fundamentals in the same way that we design them for a human. We've also got kind of nice hooks and interfaces where sort of an AI or agent or bot could actually go in and use them. So we're working on some really cool features like that. We just released a new feature, for example, that makes it easy for companies to, instead of kind of just visualizing all the data in a log kind of manually and like trying to figure out what they should look at, we have a way where AI actually can kind of tell a human like, hey, you should go and look at the accelerometer data because there was an unusual vibration event in that. So maybe the robot had an unexpected problem. Um, and we've also been working on some technology where if you see something interesting in the logs, you can ask the question, have we ever seen anything like this before? Or is it the first time that we've seen this? So you can also start searching for patterns in the log data as well, whether it's like a visual graphical pattern or perhaps even something in the text log as well. So yeah, we're really excited about the stuff. We've already done some beta release for some of the customers that we work with, and the reaction is usually like, "Whoa." So we're hoping we can roll it out for more people soon.
I was talking earlier today with someone, also a founder in the robotic space, and what we talked about was when they got their first customer, they went to the factory. So this is manufacturing here, and they spent like 8 months there, and so they really understood. So you know what? Let's forget about the tech. So let's not talk about what we do and what we build. They understood that on the shop floor level, it's all about what can the customer, what can a blue collar, what can an operator do with that, right? And I like the fact that you just said that you gave them a better version of something, and the better version was something that helped them so in a way it made it so easy for them to understand where the value is, because this is what a lot of robotics companies struggle with. It's nice
Mhm.
tech, it can move nice, it looks nice, but what do I get out of it? And especially as you said before, some people are very excited about the technology they're working on. So sounds good.
Yeah, we're in a really cool space where it's strange, our customers kind of look like us a lot of the time, right? They're also robotics engineers. They're super excited about this field and this domain. And so I'm always like really surprised and kind of excited where we build new things and our customers want to try it. It's not like we need to convince them like, hey, this will be useful, like trust us, go and give it a go. It's like, sometimes we even had one company, we released something in our SDK. We didn't do any announcement about it. And one of the engineers there was just looking through our SDK documentation and discovered this subtle new feature that we'd introduced that looked very interesting to them. And then we got a whole bunch of questions from this company like, hey, how do I start using this new feature? And we were like, oh, we've not even announced it yet. It's crazy that they, even went looking for that stuff in the documentation. So there's really an exciting pull for this technology in the space right now, which I think is energizes us. And it's like this flywheel, right? Where like we get excited, they're getting excited, we get even more excited, and everyone's just moving faster.
Uh, I'm curious to see where this leads to you guys. As you mentioned earlier on, your co-founder is living in Zurich. So we just met for lunch the other day, and is that hard for you guys to split between like two places that are very far away from each other? Maybe you can spend the last few minutes on that one.
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I get asked that question quite a lot, actually. I think people assume it's maybe bad. Maybe that's why they get concerned about it. I don't know. I think in our case, it would be really difficult if we didn't know each other very well. I think that's the key asterisk. We worked together at Amazon for 5 or 6 years together. We even lived together at one point as well. So we do know each other very well. What I've actually found in the last kind of year recently, though, is that one benefit of us being in separate time zones is that we aren't both randomized by the same things all the time. So you know, when the West Coast is awake and doing things, my day sometimes is very disrupted, right? Because customers are emailing me, I'm doing some new presentation. I sometimes in my day don't have much time to just sit and think and understand maybe where we need to get to for our next milestone, for example. But Eve, while the West Coast is asleep, even Central Europe and Zurich is like uninterrupted thinking time for several hours, in the morning. And so sometimes I've been joking recently that like at least Eve can like use his brain and like think carefully about hard problems for our company while I'm kind of firefighting or, jumping into a meeting or helping one of our employees or, recruiting. So actually this has been a real benefit that as kind of co-founders, we can spend our cycles very differently just because we happen to be in very different time zones. But this is
Interesting.
changing a bit anyway for us now because Zurich has so many robotics and drone companies that Eve is also getting busier himself
Uh,
locally.
which is a position to be in, right? Yeah, but it's taking off, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, let's see what comes out of that. The we had a talk with one of the uh, Greater Zurich area. So this is someone who they are pushing this, right? The tech, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm there, because there's a lot of cool stuff happening. There's a lot of very interesting stuff happening, and it's in the heart of Europe. So let's see what we will, if we can compete with you guys over there in on the West Coast. I'm very thankful that you took the time. We had a chat a few weeks ago, and I had the feeling it was a very nice connection between you and I. And thanks for walking me through the life of Benji and taking us with you, because I think it was very exciting. I think you're a terrific guy, and I think it's because I was asking Eve once or twice why is not he doing the podcast, and he says talk to Benji and you will know. And then I think he was totally right. You have such an outgoing energy. I really enjoy talking to you. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much as well. It was really awesome to talk to you and think through.
Say again.
It was really awesome to talk to you and think through my life.
Yeah, yeah, because very often you don't think about these kind of things, right? Especially as a founder, you're very occupied with being here today or maybe in the future, things you need to do. So yeah, it is sometimes very nice to delve to go through these kind of emotions and decisions and turning points, right? So yeah, it was my pleasure that we could do this together, and looking forward to see you. Maybe we'll be able to see you there, because as you said, you are in Europe at the moment. Maybe we can make it happen. But other than that, thank you again, and take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.